This DeWalt DW735 planer is not cheap, but is it worth the cost? In this video, I'll tear it apart and show you the build quality, the good, and the not so good. And this video is not sponsored by DeWalt. I bought this on Amazon about a year ago with my own money. This video is sponsored by mywoodcutters.com. While I have this apart, I'm going to install one of their Lux Cut 3 helical carbide cutter heads. They did not give it to me for free, but they did give me a discount to sponsor this video. My experience working with them is that they have responsive customer service, good prices, and knives for so many different machines. So if you're looking for knives or helical cutter heads, check out mywoodcutters.com. All right, let's get started. Right off the bat, we can see one of the things I really like about this. This big chunky brushed motor drives the cutter head with a belt over here, but it also drives an exhaust fan that pulls out and blows out the chips when you're using the planer. I have it hooked up to a hose and a bag, and it just really does a great job collecting the dust. If you were going to replace the blades, removing these 3 threaded thumb screws is the next step. Then the shroud comes off. Once that is off, we have access to the blades and the cutter head. Now that we're getting in here more, we can see some of the details and some of the good build quality on this. Basically, the way this works is the motor and everything is part of this upper carrier that rides up and down on these threaded posts. The carrier itself looks well made. This is all cast aluminum, no cheap plastic in there. These 4 threaded posts are another thing that is nice about this design. This is very sturdy. If you look at more affordable planers, often the carrier will be supported by 4 smooth posts, and then maybe they'll have 1 or 2 other threaded posts which are used to actually control the height of the carrier. On this one, with the 4 threaded posts, this is more secure because with smooth posts, you know, the whole carrier can kind of rack a little bit, but on this, it is thoroughly supported and engaged in each corner, so it's a much sturdier design. If I really get in here, you can kind of see how this works. There is a chain that goes to a gear and a threaded piece that rides up and down on the post, and there is one of these on each corner. I've seen some complaints online that this machine vibrates enough that this wheel will rotate and mess up the cut. That has only happened to me when the knives are too dull, so if you're having that problem, check your knives. They did only use a shielded bearing. You can see the metal shield. A sealed bearing with a rubber seal would be nicer here. That would be better at keeping out the dust. Taking a look at the drive mechanisms here, and there are 2 different types because they need to accomplish different purposes. The chain and these sprockets are for the rubber rollers that feed the wood through the machine. They don't go that fast and they need a lot of torque, so this makes sense. The cutter head spins much faster, so in this application, a belt makes sense. Both of these designs look fine. It's also nice to see a little spring-loaded tensioner for this chain. This is the lever that adjusts the feed rate. I only use hardwood, and you need to use the slower feed rate for that, so that's all I ever use. If you are someone who's going to be changing the speeds a lot, don't worry about the mechanism failing. They use solid metal rods which connect to the transmission, really heavy duty. I thought maybe they'd use a cable that could stretch or something over time, but they did not. This looks good. Taking a look at the transmission itself, there is a nice spring-loaded tensioner for the drive chain. The transmission housing here is aluminum. The front plate looks like galvanized steel. There is a rubber gasket to hold the lubrication in the transmission, which is nice to see. Overall, this all looks good. I pulled out the cutter head. I will talk about the design of this later because I have some issues with that. But as far as the build quality, it's pretty good. Starting out with the drive gear, see that purple around the base? This has been hardened, which is a good sign. That'll make it last longer. This bearing is sealed, which is very good. That'll keep dust out of there. And it is a name brand Nachi bearing. This is a high quality Japanese bearing company. I have used these bearings before and I like them. The other side has a bigger bearing. It's sealed, but it's kind of a no-name brand. Maybe that's okay because this is bigger and it can handle a lot more force, but ideally it would be nice to see name brand bearings on both sides. Looking at the machine work, it's pretty consistent, pretty good. I have no complaints about that. This is machined from a solid chunk of steel and it is heavy. After pulling the gearbox out, there is plenty of grease in there. No need to worry about the lubrication. A nice little design detail I noticed. This is a brushed motor, so eventually you may need to service the brushes. You can access one of them right there, but what about the other one? Well, they installed a little removable grate so you can get to the other side. The brushes on this are really easy to service. There is a plastic cap you unscrew and the brush comes out. I can see a stamped brass brush holder inside the motor, which is fine, but you shouldn't need to worry about servicing these because there is a lot of meat on these brushes. They may wear out eventually, but it won't be anytime soon. Now, this has never happened to me, but if this were to get clogged up, you could clean it out. You take this off, there's a clip there, a couple screws, the housing will open up and you can clean out the chips. This is another part of the drive mechanism here. It is a shaft that is solid steel, nicely machined. All throughout the drive mechanism on this, they have used high quality parts. Now, let's talk about the design of the cutter head and why I am upgrading to this. A carbide helical cutter head from mywoodcutters.com. This is the Lux Cut 3. The design of this makes installing and swapping blades really simple. You don't have to worry about adjusting the blade or anything. It's indexed on these little pegs. So to install the blade, you just drop it on, put this cover on, put in the screws, and you're done. And when you want to flip it over, because the blades have two edges, all you have to do is rotate it, put it back on those pegs, reinstall the cover, and you're back in action. So replacing the blades is really easy because there's no adjustment to worry about. But that's also a negative in some ways because you cannot sharpen these blades because there's no way to compensate by adjusting the blade. So the most you can do is a light honing when they start to get dull, which will give you a tiny bit more life. But even doing that, I have been burning through blades like crazy. Here's the problem I'm running into with the factory knives and design. I work pretty much exclusively with hardwood and stuff like this. This is reclaimed old growth oak taken from a local barn. This stuff is beautiful, but my word, it is dense and hard. And I'm just burning through these factory blades. I might use more than one set of blades in a small project just because planing this old growth timber wears them out so fast. So I crunched the numbers. This is not a cheap upgrade, but upgrading to this helical cutter head will pay for itself over several years. The rest of the machine looks good quality, so I'm not concerned it'll last that long. With these, the cutter heads are made of carbide, so they last much longer. In addition to that, you can see they have 4 sides, so you can rotate them when one side gets dull, and it's relatively easy to replace the cutter heads. So overall, like I said, not a cheap upgrade, but one that will eventually pay for itself and will be really, really convenient. And yes, before you ask, I do everything you're supposed to make the blades last as long as possible. I always take shallow cuts. I make sure the wood is clean so there's not a lot of, sand and grit dulling the blades, but still, I go through them so fast. So what did we learn today? Well, the build quality on this overall is very good. A heavy-duty base, well-designed and constructed carriage, and nice quality components all throughout the drive system. For me, the only letdown is the factory cutter head and knives that wear out super fast. Maybe if you're only using soft woods, the knives would last for a while, But for me, the cost of replacement knives is really adding up. I wish DeWalt would make a version of this planer that includes carbide cutters from the factory. If they did, I think it would totally be worth buying that version. But like I already said, overall, this machine is really nicely made. And if you already own it like I do, upgrading to the carbide cutter head does make sense. So what do you think? Is this planer worth the money? Let me know in the comments down below, and thanks for watching.